I want to build a cabinet that fits into the wall. I'm in a basement shop and one wall is an unfinished stud wall, and this allows me to gain space by fitting storage in between the studs so it goes into the wall. And in a small shop you need all the space you can get. So I used to store some seldom used tools over here, but I did some purging, I did some consolidating, and now I've got this nice big opening that I want to fill with a cabinet. I'm actually going to store some of my camera gear and accessories in there, but that doesn't really matter. The point is just to build a cabinet and, you know, what do I have to do to make it work fitting it in between the studs? And there's a bunch of things to keep in mind. And the first thing is I've got some exposed wiring here on the left, but I also, on the right side, I have some wiring that pokes up here that I have to work around. I don't really want to go through the hassle of relocating the wires, and it turns out I don't really need to because this is over 38 inches tall, which is ridiculously tall. A 32-inch tall cabinet is really plenty. As for protecting the wiring on the side, I thought about like adding a stud in here, but that'll really make it super narrow. So I think instead what I'm going to do is I'll add a stud or some other sort of support here across the bottom. That'll allow my cabinet to be attached firmly on the bottom and on the side and on the top. And over here, I'll just put some wood to block away the wires. Fire extinguisher's in the way, so let me first get that out of there. That gives us some more room. You could just take measurements and start building, but being who I am, I drew it up in SketchUp first and worked out some dimensions and all that. But just to take you along for the ride, the most important thing to remember is that studs are not furniture grade lumber. They can twist, they can warp, they're not necessarily plumb. So you take measurements in a lot of places. Up at the top, I've got a 14-inch gap, but down at the bottom, I've only got 13 3/4. If I'm looking here, it's not perfectly square to the wall, but it's pretty close. But regardless, I'm going to make sure the cabinet is a little bit smaller than the opening and then fit it into place. Unfortunately, then the battery in my microphone abruptly died while I was explaining that I'm making this cabinet out of reused materials, consisting of some nice pine for the sides and a slightly gnarly piece of 1/2-inch plywood for the back. I found the plywood in my garage, but I was hoping that it would clean up nicely after some thorough 80 grit sanding. So that's where I went next. Well, it took 3 sheets of sandpaper, but it came out okay. I think I like it better than the other side anyways. It still has lots of spots, but I'm just going to call that character. And, you know, like I said, I think this side looks kind of dull, so this will be the inside of the cabinet. It's still a bit longer than it needs to be, so it's off to the crosscut sled next. I cleaned up one edge of the pine over on the jointer. And then I took it over to the table saw where I ripped it down to 5 inches of width, because that's what I've decided I want for the cabinet. I want a cabinet that's 5 inches deep. And then back to the table saw, we'll cross cut it to length for the cabinet parts. After I cut out the long pieces, I placed them on the back, and I used that to verify the length of the short end pieces. Plans are great, but you always double check your dimensions on an actual workpiece. I'd like to have adjustable shelves in this cabinet, and I think it makes it easier if I drill those holes before I assemble the cabinet. I'm using the Craig jig, but it's a very simple idea. It's just a board with a bunch of holes drilled in, and I don't need to start right at the bottom, so I'm going to start up here at the number 4 position. And I'm just going to try that again with the drill properly in. And there we go. That was nice and quick. Knocked out a set of shelf pin holes in practically no time. And yeah, I know I'm supposed to be holding this with a clamp. I was just freehanding it. You know, be sure to read and follow all the instructions that come with your tools. I'll put a link to this down below, but you could build something like this with a drill press and a couple of boards in no time, but this is also pretty cheap. And next I'll give my pieces a quick sanding before I move on to assembly, because it's a lot easier before they're together. So next I'm going to clamp and assemble the cabinet with glue and screws. A little over 34.5, and the same, so that's square. The back of the cabinet's going to be buried in the wall, so there's no need to try to pretty it up. I'm just going to surface mount it here on the back. Some glue, some nail, and probably some screws also, because there's just a little bow in it. And guess what? We built a box. And that should fit nicely right in there. So in terms of normal cabinets, I'm taking a little bit of a left turn here into an experiment, and I've prepared this piece which is going to be kind of a hat on the top of the cabinet. And the reason is this is a wood shop, it gets dusty, and you know, cabinets go a long way to keeping the dust out, but I had the idea of putting a hat on the top of the cabinet to sort of just cover that gap at the top of the door to try to help keep dust out, especially because I'm going to be putting camera gear in here. It's like, I know you could work into things like gaskets and latches and all that, but I'm just trying this, and we're just going to see. So I got my cabinet here, and of course the door is going to go here on the front, so I want something that's just going to overhang here. And I just went into my scrap bin. I didn't even have a big enough piece, but this is a nice thin piece of 1/2-inch maple. I mean, that's all I need. So I'm just going to tack this into place here. And yes, it still fits. I was planning this right from the beginning. I did actually make the cabinet a bit wider than I had planned. I thought I was going to leave a little bit more space there, but it'll be fine. So my new cabinet height is just a hair over 32.5. I'd say 32 9/16. So allowing a little bit, I measured down 32 5/8, and I cut a support block to go in here, which I want to level, of course. Just about there. But I need to fasten it in now. So let me quick make this go away for a few minutes so that I can get at there. There we go. And I doubt myself enough that I have clamped it in place loose. Let's do a test fit. Looks like it'll fit okay. And it looks like it'll be pretty plumb also, so. And this is one of these situations when you want the right angle drill. Oh, even then it's fighting me. Guess I need to take down the dust collector pipe for a second. Hopefully that gives me enough space. And now, if I can get in with a regular one. It's actually tight quarters over here also. But that is all we need. I'm mostly counting on the support of the sides and the top, but it is nice to have this piece on the bottom. Maybe for the last time. Looks like I need to shift it just a little bit that way to get plumb. So, and level. So, I think I'll first put a screw here, and then I'll put a screw there, and then maybe I'll put in some wedges here. Just making sure all the way in. Still level, good. Yep, that's plumb also. You know, I might need a longer screw here. Yep, longer screw. 3-inch screw in the top. I think good enough for a shop cabinet. Now let me put a little wedge in there. And one in the bottom just to keep it from wiggling around. And I know it's a shop cabinet, but I don't want to get a bunch of crap gathering in this hole, so I'm going to just quickly plug it. Slice that flush later. And since I'm already plugging, I'm also going to plug these two holes, which are visible, just for fun. I actually had a few walnut plugs sitting around, so these are going to get a contrasting wood. There, that looks nice. And having to remove all this actually turned out to be a good thing, because when I put it back, I simply slid this tool holder over just, about 3/4 of an inch, which nicely covers the wires. I made a couple of notches up there, and it's a nice tight fit. Keeps everything hidden away. And then I immediately took the tools down because I just thought, I think this is a good time to put a quick coat of shellac on the inside here. A quick seal coat of shellac will just help with, with the looks for one thing, but it'll give it a bit of a protection, and it'll make it a little bit less attractive to dust. The shellac really makes the back stand out. And I figured I might as well do the tool hanger at the same time. And I think it all turned out nice. So I got a cabinet, I need a door, and I spent most of the afternoon sort of pondering what I'm going to do, because most of my cabinets in the shop are just painted flat panel doors, but not all. This is a bit of that's a unique situation. But still, a shop project is a great time to experiment, and I was just pondering different ideas. And I found this veneer in the drawer, and I bought this over a year ago when I was experimenting, and so not exactly scrap wood, but I'm sticking with the theme of working with stuff I already have, and yeah, I'm going to try veneering the panel for the door, and for the rails and stiles of the door, I am going with scrap. I've got this piece of a tabletop that I rescued from the trash, a long time ago, and I've used it in a few projects already. I keep nibbling away at it. And back to the gnarly plywood, I think this is going to be the panel that I'm going to veneer, but it's a bit too thick, so I'm first going to do one of those unusual tasks and run this through my planer after I cut it down to size. Well, let me work on the maple first, and I need to rip these holes off the side. These are the alignment holes for, this was a leaf from a table, so let's actually check. So I need to go that much deep, so I'm going to cut to there. So I want to get the old finish off this maple, so I'm going to run it through the planer, but I'm going to run it as lightly and as little as I can, because I want to end up with something that's as close to 3/4 of an inch thick as possible. Now luckily, these are a hair over, like a 1/16 of an inch over 3/4 of an inch, so I think I have enough to work with. Okay, that's a complete failure. First of all, I clogged up my planer because it came off in these really thin shavings, but the main problem is like, for instance, see there, and where is it now? On this side, there's a knot. I'm just not getting a flat enough substrate for doing any veneering on it. So this is not a good piece of plywood, and I have a 3/4 inch piece of plywood, but I would have to plane down like a whole 1/2 inch of it. I don't know that that would work. I might try it anyways, but if so, I should maybe only plane the one side so I make sure I keep the top flat. I'm gonna have to think for a bit. Okay, I've had to rethink things, obviously, because the veneer is off the table, and that's actually kind of a good thing, because this was a really tall door, and I have these little pieces that I would be piecing together, so part of me is kind of relieved, but I'd like to do it again sometime, but with a bigger piece of veneer. But I do have a plan B and a plan C. Plan B is safe and easy in that I have another piece of this scrap maple tabletop, and I could just plane this down to like 1/2 inch or something, and there I've got myself a panel, and I've got myself a nice maple door. That's good. But then I kept looking around in my shop, and I have this piece of white oak which has some interesting figure on it, and it is just a hair over an inch thick. So I should be able to resaw this in half and then book match it to make a nice wide panel. Considerably more work. I'm going to try this first. So we're first going to try plan C, but we still have plan B in our pocket if that doesn't work. So first let me cut this down to size and let's do some resawing. Actually, first I jointed the one edge. Since I'm a hair over 1 inch, I'm setting my blade to a hair over a half. And in case you didn't know, resawing is not a particularly fast process, especially with a board this wide. And admittedly, my bandsaw blade is not that new. And if I flip it open, it looks like that. There's a couple of knots and a bunch of interesting holes. But if I move them like this, now I've got 2 eyes and a great big beak, like a head of a pterodactyl or something. So I think this is the way I'm going to glue this up. So there we go. Not perfect. It started out really nice. But by the time I got to the end, it had drifted a fair bit. I was trying to hold it. I could see that the blade was not perfect, but hopefully that is still thick enough. So I'm going to plane these a little bit and then we will glue them up into a nice panel. Or should I glue them up first? I'm not sure if there is a one right answer, but gluing it together first won out for me as the thing that I thought I would do. So I actually ripped the pieces a bit skinnier and then I've jointed this edge. Now I'm going to put it together and hopefully it stays good and flat, and then I will run it through the planer after. Because they're not quite even there, I'm clamping them down to these flat cawls so that hopefully the bottom side is properly aligned. That's my goal. Looks like a good glue joint, so now we wait. And there's the result, so let's get it through the planer a few times. And that's going really well. So far I'm at just a hair over 3/8 of an inch in thickness, which is good. The knots are looking cool, and so is the beak. Down at this end, right around there, there's still some part that needs a little bit more planing, but I wanted to stop because I want to get some epoxy into the eyes. But let me put the maple around it for a minute. Sort of debating if I should make the whole door out of white oak, but I think we're going to stick with this. Looks kind of neat to have the pale maple against the dark white oak. So I'm going to put some tuck tape behind there, and I think I might put some epoxy here along the beak. I don't think there's much chance of it going through, but this is cheap insurance. I've got my 5-minute epoxy, I got some stir sticks, got a little bit of black ebony stain for mixing in, and I've got my heat gun, because I like to heat up the wood first because it helps the epoxy flow in, because this is just 5-minute epoxy. This is just a 1-to-1 mix. Just put out one blob, another blob of roughly the same size. And I'm just eyeballing it. And I just use a little bit of stain. And again, make sure the wood is nice and warm. And that one can go here. And this is 5-minute epoxy, but I'm basically done for the night with this piece of wood because it may be dry in 5 minutes, but it's not really hard. And yeah, I ended up coming back and filling in all the little holes with my epoxy. So let's see what it looks like tomorrow. And now back to the rails and stiles. I'm going to take them down to their finished width of 2 1/4 inches on the table saw. So I'm going to use stub tenons for the cabinet doors, and I've got the table saw set up for that. I've got the blade set to take a 1/2 inch deep cut, and the feather boards are there to keep the piece tight to the table. You'll take the cut once and then reverse it and take it a second time, and that keeps it perfectly centered in the piece. Next, I want to make the stub tenon, so let's take the blade and bring it down right about there. And then we will do some practice cuts. And if you got things right, you get something like this, except I don't quite have it right. I've got just a little bit of wiggle there, so I've got to raise the saw blade up just a hair. So after a little bit more fiddling with the blade height, a little bit more cutting, I have a piece like that. But yes, I might have used the shoulder plane a bit to finesse the fit. I'd rather have it a little too tight than too loose. A little too tight I can deal with. So now I'm going to go on and cut these to length. And one thing to keep in mind is order of operations, which I kind of forgot about because I was working on getting this table saw set up. I was getting this table saw all set up for cutting the stub tenons, but then it's like, well, what am I going to use to cut my pieces to length? I'm not a great fan of the miter saw, but good thing I've got it. And here's a sped up section that shows all the cuts I have to make one stub tenon. Because I don't put in a dado blade, I'm just using a regular blade, so I make repeated cuts, and then I have to do this 3 more times. Got the 2 goes in like that, and at the other end, like that. A little bit of finessing on this one. Left some lines from the table saw blade. There we go. There we have a frame. Now let's work on the panel. And when we last left the panel, it was covered with epoxy, which has now dried. So I've already started working on taking off the tape, and then we can get it plain that last little bit. But after a little bit of light planing, I cut my panel to size on the table saw. But it's still a bit too thick. Here's an offcut, and it is not going to go in there. So I need to put the dado blade in, and I'll put a rabbet around the outside. And well, I pushed record, but it didn't take on the camera, and I didn't notice that the light wasn't on. But using my safety blocks from the joiner, and I went over it all 4 sides. So I have a rabbet all the way around. No Hollywood budget here for reshoots. So might need a little finessing of some of these joints. That one is looking a little tight. Try it the other way around. I think this piece must have lifted a bit going over the blade, so we'll do that quickly again. Yeah, sometimes a board might lift a bit when you're going over a dado blade, so I ended up just redoing the whole thing. So at least you got to see the cutting operation then. Well, let's try again. Oh, that fits better. Oh yeah. So now a little glue and a little clamping, and I'm going to turn that into a door. Some glue on the tenons. And on the back also. Don't let me forget to turn this back over because I definitely have a front and a back. Burn 1 inch, 28 3/4, 28 3/4. We'll leave it overnight. We're just having fun in the shop. Well, it's the next day and I've just finished gluing up this pine panel, and you might wonder why. Because I screwed up. So I think I've mentioned a few times this cabinet that I'm making is 32 inches tall, so I need a door that's 32 inches tall. But what I somehow have is a door that is not quite 31 inches tall. And yeah, I know, measure twice, cut once, but sometimes we still mess up. What to do though? I could add a little strip at the top of the bottom, and I think it would look ugly because it would just sort of throw off the proportions. And the more this project has come along, the more, to me, this door has become the feature of the project. So I want this door to look nice. So that pine is going to shrink the cabinet. I'm not sure about the bottom, but what I'm planning to do is just put in another panel across the top, which will bring it down 3/4 of an inch. And I think I'm going to now just cut another curved piece here to maybe fit underneath, to maybe add a bit of visual interest, to make it look like that's the way I wanted it all along. In the meantime, I'm going to trim the door to size and work on this little curve. For trimming the door, I'm going to use my large panel cutting jig. We just want to trim these pieces off, but not trim anything off of that. And as you can see, if I line it up on the top, it's too short on the bottom, and if I line it up on the bottom, it is too short on the top. So, but it does look good. And since I'm waiting for that new pine panel to dry, I thought I might as well go ahead and I sanded this door, and I'm putting on a coat of shellac. And I'm sorry, I've got you the wrong way around. Yeah. Here, you get a first look at what Mr. Pterodactyl is going to look like. It is subtle, which I kind of like. Oh, I like how that black is standing out now against the other color. You do sort of have this line going all the way down, but I'm sticking with my pterodactyl imagery. And this should be dry in about 20 minutes. All right, let's get this fixed. And then a little bit of, and then a little. And then finally in the cabinet, I'm first going to remove this top screw, because otherwise in future there's going to be no way to get it out because it's going to be buried. So then for the top, I have a little spacer and then this new board that I made, and that looks a little bit weird, but I also made a new version of this curve. This time I used white oak because the door is white oak and maple, and that's going to go there. The result is now a cabinet that is like the door, just a hair under 31 inches tall. So it should snug into there quite nicely. I need a little helping hand here, so to clamp it. The hole in the front is just for holding it together, but in the back, I will need to put that screw back in. This is going back all the way to the stud. That drill might be a little weak for a 3-inch. And this last piece of trim I'm going to hold in place with some 23 gauge brads. And now the door nicely fits. So see what I mean about this is white oak and this is white oak. This is maple, this is maple. So I'm back again with mixing the wood species. Okay, almost done. I think I'll do some shellac quickly, and then we can get the hinges mounted. While I was touching up the shellac on the cabinet, I also put 2 coats of polyurethane on the door, so it is completely finished, and I'm really liking this figure on it. I think it's looking cool. This is, your basic flat panel shaker style door. It's not quite flush out the back, but it is definitely closer to the back because that's, the rabbit was oriented that way on the panel. I'm sticking with my theme of not buying anything, so I'm using some secondhand hinges. I salvaged the good hinges when I tore out my kitchen a few years ago, so these are some perfectly good Euro hinges that I can use. I have another Craig jig, and no, I'm not sponsored, for drilling the hinge holes. I got this 5 years ago when I did my kitchen, and it just does an awesome job of holding the drill at the exact right spot. The drill bit in the guide goes into your drill, and that locks back into the jig, and then it's impossible to drill too deep or in the wrong spot. Perfect positioning. The jig also has little points for marking where the other 2 holes go. I usually just don't bother with that. And that's it, 2 perfectly positioned holes. To position the door, I'm just going to temporarily clamp this little support there so I can hold the door in place. And I'm trying to not block the camera, but I'm just going to position the door here and mark the center of where the hinges need to go. And yeah, I'm not a professional cabinet installer. I'm just sort of reading instructions and figuring out something that seems to work easily for me. I switched my combination square over to the millimeter side because I'm supposed to mark 37 millimeters for the hinge mount. And I'll just use that to strike a pencil line in there. Then I can position the hinge plate over those pencil lines. And there's a fair bit of adjustability. So and I'm not putting them that tight to start with, just in case they need to wiggle a bit. All right. Newer hinges I've toolless, and these are the old style, so they're still a bit fiddly, but shop cabinets and saving money. And the main thing is, the door still opens and closes. A little noisy. I think I need to get some pads in there. Off screen, I prepared these shelves of reclaimed red oak. Gave them a nice coat of shellac. They're about 5/8 of an inch thick, which gives plenty of shelf space for this little cabinet. Okay guys, that's me and my pterodactyl cabinet. I think it turned out awesome. I really love the look of the door. There were a few dead ends on this road, but we got here in the end, had a bunch of fun in the shop, tried a bunch of different techniques, and yeah, that's it for this one. We'll see you on the next one.